Welcome to Country Fried Rock, where we talk with musicians to find out what inspires their creativity. Country Fried Rock, music uncovered. I'm Sloan Spencer. This week on Country Fried Rock, we're talking with Ben Tanner of Alabama Shakes. Actually, Tanner is part of nearly every single emerging band coming out of Alabama these days. But we're not going to talk about the obvious stuff with Tanner. I wanted to know more about his collaboration with John Paul White of the Civil Wars and a friend of theirs from home to create Single Lock Records, an independent record label featuring 3 emerging Alabama bands that you need to know. So we see what keeps the creative fires burning for the incredible talent Ben Tanner this week on Country Fried Rock. My guest today on Country Fried Rock is Ben Tanner from Alabama, someone whose name you might not recognize, but you've heard the music he has touched quite a bit on this radio show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I was saying before we started on the air, all right, so when the third band said, well, we consider Ben Tanner to be an honorary member of this band, I was like, all right, we got to talk. We'll set the stage for what you're doing now, but how'd you get into music as a kid?
I started playing piano when I was about 6 years old. We always had a piano in the house, and my older sister took lessons, and begrudgingly, she never really got into it. But I always wanted to play, so I started taking lessons when I was about 6 years old. Did that, 5 or 6 years. I was probably about 12 when I quit to pursue my basketball career. It just worked out great. But then when I was a teenager, started playing in bands, mostly playing guitar and bass then, and into college, and then sort of fell back into being a keyboard player when a lot of bands I played with, a lot of friends of mine always wanted keys on stuff, and there just really weren't many keyboard players, and so I had a little bit of a background in it and just fell back into that, and then because I was the only keyboard player around, started playing in lots and lots of bands because lots of them wanted a keys player.
Got it. So that being available to a lot of different projects started real early.
Yeah, I moved back I'm from Muscle Shoals originally, left after high school and came back about 7 years ago now, and I was working at Fame Studios. I had like a staff job there for a few years. When I was at Fame, I started doing some keyboard work on sessions, just a little bit here and there. Just if they needed something simple as opposed to calling a session player, I could just do it, and I was already there. And then was playing with a couple of people here and there, and then it just kind of built up where more and more people were asking me, and I'd say yes, or I would do stuff on their record and then play with them when I could.
And I think that's really where your name kept coming up for us.
Yeah. Through
different projects. Well, so then at some point it became more than just being the simple keys guy.
Still not that good. I know how to play in a band,
right.
Which is a totally different thing than being like a solo performer or anything like that.
From an engineering standpoint, were you just kind of doing a little of everything at Fame?
Yeah, a little bit. When I came there, they didn't have a staff engineer at the time. They were kind of in between engineers, but I was really doing kind of a little bit of everything for them, doing some like administration stuff for the publishing company, and sort of grew into a studio manager, staff engineer kind of position. But I knew a little bit when I started there about some basic engineering stuff, but 95% of what I know I learned there, kind of on the job. Early on, just assisting other engineers and producers that would come in, and then over time sort of started small, doing demos for the publishing company and stuff like that, and being able to record bands on the weekends and making lots of mistakes and figuring it out and gradually getting better at it.
It's funny, we talk with a lot of people who have the buddy deals with recording their friends on the weekends and stuff. How did that start to be something where you were the guy your friends were calling? It wasn't just because you were available.
I think the first one I realized was Belle Adair. Matt Green is the main singer and songwriter in Belle Adair. He and I have been friends since we were kids, probably 8 or 9 years old. So when I started working at Fame, Belle Adair, or even before it was Belle Adair, we would record stuff in the weekend all the time, and it would just be hey, I'll record your stuff, and it'll give me a chance to experiment and learn and make mistakes that aren't on the clock kind of thing. And that just sort of built gradually. I'm not sure at which point it went from being a friend deal to people really wanting me to record them. I'm glad it did. But, it kind of went from there to I played in a band called Lauderdale and sort of co-engineered that stuff with their lead singer, and then from there, did some stuff with Doc Dailey. We were all friends. The scene up here is pretty incestuous, where everybody plays with everybody, and it just kind of became known that I would work with people's budgets, and I would do, like with Doc and with a lot of other people, I wasn't too picky. Like, I was willing to do location recording and things like that, where it's like, well, I only have money for 3 days of studio time, so if we can do overdubs at my house, then I was like, well, sure, we can do that. I'll throw some gear in the car and do that. And just sort of with playing with people and with working on those records, just never saying no. Like, never wanted to be like, well, no, I don't want to do it that way. Just at least trying to work with people and help them get some records made.
Country Fried Rock is proud to announce our second compilation to raise funds and awareness for musicians' mental health services. You can help keep music alive by pre-ordering our second compilation for Nuci's Space. Check it out at countryfriedrock.bandcamp.com. All of the proceeds raised go directly to the model program for community-based mental health services, reaching the musician community of Athens, Georgia. Born of tragedy, but making a difference for people right now. Prevent musician suicide. You know an organization makes a difference when people like this step up to the plate and donate songs. We thank them, and we thank you for your generous contributions to preventing musician suicide. Keep music alive.
Hey, this is Ben Tanner, and you're listening to Country Fried Rock.
All three of those bands have been played in one way or another in Country Fried Rock at different times. But Doc Dailey was kind of our portal into the new, I hate all the terminology that's used, but I don't know how else to refer to it. New bands who happen to be in the Shoals area. That'd be a good way to say it.
Yeah, that'll work.
I'm trying to be like, because it's like, ooh, the Shoals scene. Well, yeah.
Yeah. You can call it whatever you want.
But Doc was kind of our entry into learning about the new stuff that was happening there. It was pretty exciting. So you moved on then from working just with Fame and had a lot of other producing/engineering opportunities. How did that expand?
Yeah, I was at Fame for about 3 years and then just sort of had more and more opportunities to work outside of Fame where it just sort of made sense to go freelance. So I did a lot of stuff at a studio called Wishbone in the Shoals, and then sort of had various little project studios with people and things like that, just smaller, like mix room kind of setups. And then right as all that was happening, Dylan LeBlanc, who I'd known since he was 15 or 16, and he and I had a very similar relationship to that Belle Adair thing I was talking about, where he was 16 years old, he was writing songs. His dad is a songwriter, and
right.
who was with the Fame publishing company, which is why Dylan was always kind of hanging around the studio, and he was sort of honing his craft. I was trying to learn how to record, and so we did a lot of stuff at nights and on weekends, and that same sort of thing, like, hey, I'll record your songs, but you got to let me kind of do what I want to do, and we can experiment together and kind of learn. Well, a lot of that stuff turned into his first album.
Oh, cool.
Pauper's Field. Yeah, most of the stuff I recorded on that, we never really thought we were making a record. We were just... He was writing songs, and he'd say, hey, I wrote this song. Do you mind staying late this evening or coming in this weekend, and we can just put it down? That's how most of that record was made. And then he got the interest of Rough Trade. So he, not long after I left Fame, he got this record deal, and I'd played a lot on the recordings, and we had played together a little bit, and he said, got this record deal, I'm going to start playing a lot of shows, do you want to go on the road? And I said, well, sure, why not? I'd never really anticipated that or even dreamed about it very much. I'd always seen myself more as a studio rat than a road musician, but it made sense, and so we did it. I still play with Dylan sometimes, where we did a lot of shows, just me and him, and we did some stuff with a full band, and that kind of introduced me to the touring side of things, and it's kind of just gone from there. There've been ups and downs, but there always seems to be a project around the corner. Now,
I mean, obviously, life has changed a lot in the last couple of years for you.
Yeah.
But you're still involved in a whole lot of projects that are based there.
Yeah, I mean, so for the last year or so, playing with Alabama Shakes has kind of taken over everything. And I met them through Doc Dailey. And when I first started playing with them, they had already recorded a bunch. They had a lot of keys on the recordings. Brittany played some of them. They got some other session players playing some, and they were looking for somebody to play with them live. And so I just started sort of playing with them live when I could. But early on, it wasn't the big deal it is now, and then things happened really, really fast. But then once we hit the road, luckily, a lot of the people I work with, like a lot of these other bands and and Doc and Dylan and all those people were really flexible with trying to work around my schedule as much as they could. Me saying, well, I'll be home for a few weeks in this period. Can you wait until then? For all of last year, it was pretty nonstop. I was either on the road with the Shakes, or if I was home, I was working on some kind of record. And like I said, luckily, everybody was really patient about that process.
The being on the road part was pretty insane. Honestly, I couldn't figure out how you did as many records as you did.
With the Pollies, for instance, Jay records. He did a lot of that. I was involved some in the creation of the record, but I mostly just mixed that record. So yeah, with some things, and then like the new Bear record that came out earlier this year, sort of worked on it over the course of about a year. Like when I would be home, we'd sort of work on it in spurts and just sort of chipped away at it.
Got it. That's the Overseas Then Under. That's a good record.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, I also just didn't take a lot of days off.
It's obvious.
I've gotten a little better at. You get close to you start to teeter close to nervous breakdown territory and realize that I might just need to sit on the couch for a day and everything will feel a lot better. I can't not work for too long, and it's not really work to me,
right.
Especially now. I've been lucky in the past year or so that everything I've worked on I really love, and that's really all I ever wanted to do, was to get to the point where I'd just be working on stuff I liked all the time, and I've been there for the past year or so, and hopefully it stays that way.
Never miss a radio show from Country Fried Rock. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Just search Country Fried Rock.
Hey, this is Ben Tanner from Single Lock Records. Check out upcoming releases from Belle Adair and St. Paul and the Broken Bones at singlelock.com.
What have you been working on that is not out yet?
I should be getting back from mastering any day now, the St. Paul and the Broken Bones.
I am so excited about that. I can hardly stand it.
Yeah, me too. I mixed it probably, a few weeks, a month ago. I mixed it at Fame. Yeah, it's a great record. They're a great band. We're really, really excited. And I'm proud to have been able to work with them on it. And I can't wait for people to hear it. But yeah, we should have a finished product back, hopefully sometime this week.
What led to forming a label?
Well, I guess I wanted to make sure I would never have any time off again, ever. But it started with a conversation. The three partners in Single Lock are myself and John Paul White from the Civil Wars, and a third partner named Will Trapp, who's not a music industry person, but I've known Will pretty much my whole life. He's more on the financial and business planning side. It started with conversations with me and Will, sort of just talking about the local music scene, and he's a native of the area and also moved around a lot and has been back for a few years now, and just him sort of having curiosity about how to help it grow and how to foster what was already happening naturally with all these bands, all these musicians. And it started as us talking about all these projects that we've mentioned here, with like the Pollies and Doc and TheBear and all of them. They're all these bands making records on their own, and you always bump up against the budget ceiling where, like I said, somebody might only be able to afford only so many days in the studio, or you may think, wow, it'd be great to get horns on this, but we can't afford it. Just, things like that. You always making compromises based on how much money's in your pocket. And, always thought with Will, it's like I'd love to get in a situation where I could just take that relief off of them, not jump to spending $100,000 on a record, or you know what I mean? Not go into like, we're going to block out the studio for 6 months like Fleetwood Mac, but just being able to say, hey, if we need an extra day in the studio, let's do it. Or if we want horns or strings, or if we want to record the tape, let's do it. Because in the end, that's not that much money. If you need to hire a musician for a few $100, that really means you only need to sell 20 or 30 records to pay for that. And when you think of it that way, it's really worth it. It's not that much of an investment, but you can't do that if you don't have the cash in your pocket. You don't have the cash in your pocket. So it started with us having conversations about that, and then just sort of forming this idea of a new kind of record label. And then I've known John for years, and he was kind of coming off the road, and he and I were talking about putting together like a small studio together because he wanted a place to work, and I was kind of in between places, and started talking to him about the label. And at first he said, well, let me think about it, and then he came along and said, I really want to be involved with this. I think it's cool. And he's got a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge. So yeah, really what we're trying to do is that basic idea is just help bands make records, help them either make a record if they couldn't make themselves, or make a better record than they could make themselves. Still not spend a ton of money, put them in a position where they can make a record, they can make their money back quickly, and then actually make some money on it, and just put all these bands, especially in our area, but not limited to that. I mean, St. Paul's from Birmingham, put these bands in a position to succeed without being burdened by a mountain of debt the way they might be under a more traditional record deal.
I'm not sure that people really understand the difference between like totally DIY or you're with a major, but there's so much in between.
Yeah.
I almost feel like we need a different word than record label, just because.
That's funny you say that. I mean, like John Paul and I had that exact conversation today.
Oh my gosh!
Do we need to call this something else? I don't think there's a name for it. What are we doing? I mean, if you call it people have an idea of what a record label is. Some of that applies to what we're doing, and some of it really doesn't. John and I have both seen a lot of different kinds of record label situations, and we're trying to avoid a lot of the, like, trim the fat. I mean, really, I think what we're trying to do is be a step or two above DIY, but not try to take on all the financial burdens and implications of being a full-scale record label.
Did you know you can download each podcast for free? Just scroll down to the bottom of the page on countryfriedrock.org.
Hey, this is Ben Tanner from Single Lock Records. For more information, check us out at singlelock.com.
Say there was some band out there somewhere and they were seeking, something that would help them. What elements of a deal look good to a band who has previously been totally DIY?
I mean, I think the appeal for a band that has never had a record deal before, one, being able to, what we're willing to do is spend a little more on the recording side. But then, a bigger label, whether that's a large indie or a major, they have money to spend and they have staff, things like radio promotion and marketing and PR and all these relationships that they can feel out. But, if that's all appealing when you're a band, but what you don't think about is that, that all costs money, and it's your money. Like, even if a record label gives you an advance or, they've got a budget that they're paying for, you got to pay that back. That's not a gift, and I think that's really hard for new bands and young bands to wrap their head around. And most of them would say they don't even care about incurring that kind of debt, but they should. I've seen a lot of people get into really terrible situations because of that. That being said, it works. Like, it works for some bands. We're interested in kind of trying something a little different.
Looking at the three bands that you all currently have, what is it that you all would like to see with those projects?
I mean, our vision really is that old school label model. You incur a large amount of debt that you pay off, and then once you pay off that debt, you get a royalty. Well, it's usually pretty small. It's usually on the order of 10 to 15%. So for every record you sell, you're getting $1 or so. What we're trying to do is lower overhead, less debt, and then giving bands a much, much larger piece of the pie so that a band can get out on the road and feasibly get into a situation where they're generating their own cash flow, and then they can sustain themselves and do whatever they want with that. The other part of that old model is they're going to dictate what you do. I mean, they're going to dictate how you're marketed. They're going to be very influential in all the decisions, and we really don't have very much desire to do that. I mean, we want to advise the artists we're working with if they want it, sort of share our experiences and share some of our relationships and help them get connected with the right people and the people they want to be connected to. But in the end, we're not really concerned with dictating every step of how a band develops, but we're trying to put them in a situation to succeed and, like I said, not get buried under a mountain of debt. So for those bands with records coming out, with Belle Adair and St. Paul, I know for both of them, the goal is get on the road, play some more shows, try to get some added exposure. And if they do that, and I think for both of them they will be able to do that, if they do that, they'll be in a situation where they're actually making money that can feed whatever the next stage is for them. And the same goes for us. If it doesn't take very long for us to get repaid, whatever we put into the record, then if we get repaid and then we're making a little bit of money, but even if we just get repaid, that feeds the next project. When another band comes along and says, hey, we'd like to work with you guys, and say, we're not owed tons of money by 3 or 4 different bands that we have to just go deeper and deeper into the red. We can actually be making that money back and feeding it into the next project.
One thing I'm curious about is the collaboration amongst the different entities. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, well, like in the print shop, you may know about the Black Owl up in Florence. That's run by Jamie and Katie Barrier, who themselves are musicians. Jamie, they're in Pine Hill Haint. Jamie's got about 13 bands, I think. but Pine Hill Haint's probably the most well-known. But yeah, I mean, Jamie, a lot of people do use Jamie, use the Black Owl because of that. Like he's really, really musician-friendly. He does really good work, and he's willing to work with you, and he'll give musicians a break, and it's part of that. Yeah, it's part of that community thing. I think most of us would even rather pay Jamie a little extra to have him do it. And he's in town. You know, he's in Florence, so it's also that thing with single lock, and I just feel this way personally in general. A lot of the musicians in this area have a lot of different skills and a lot of different talents. And so, like, the single lock logo was designed by Chris James, who plays bass in the Pollies and Belle Adair. Chris is really good with graphic design, and as much as we can, we're trying to use other musicians or kind of keep it in the family, giving people the chance to use some of these other skills. We try. I mean, I feel like everybody tries to do as much of that as they can in the community up here. You might as well, if you need something done and there's somebody within our own community who can do it, we'd rather them do it.
Do you see a way to help that move the whole thing to the next step?
I mean, that's what I'm hoping for. I think what's happened up here in the past few years with the number of bands and songwriters and artists and musicians, that whole community, it's gotten to a certain point, but I feel like it just needs to be slightly more like centralized, where like we're all working together to an extent. If we can really formalize that in something like a record label, then I think that helps any one artist's success will naturally help everyone else's, that we can kind of be all in it together even more than we already are. So yeah, and with me and John at Single Lock, we've had a little more experience of the quote-unquote real music industry we can bring to the table and help move everything to at least a slightly more professional, whatever that means, level.
You also touched on something that I have been personally fascinated with, musician collaboration on a more formal level, the Elephant Six and Athens Music Collective and just lots of different groups like that.
Right.
Do you see that that's something that could be implemented to help with what y'all are doing?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're all kind of moving towards that. I mean, I think everybody's been waiting and thinking that somebody needs to do some kind of label. And the way things fell, it just really made sense for me and John to try it and to do it. And I think when people see somebody else do that, all the other bands in the community set their sights a little higher, I think. And like it or not, it's not necessarily fair, because I think all the bands that we've talked about are great and deserve to be heard by more people. But when you attach something that says Single Lock Records, when you attach that name to it, it legitimizes it a little bit, whether or not that's fair, but it definitely does. If we can make that name mean something, then it can help the bands we're working with.
You talked a little bit about the continued overlap of different bands, just using Chris James as an example, playing with the Pollies and Belle Adair. Do you all have any kind of formalized plan of helping people get on the road and working out those sort of logistics, or is it like, hey, we're just going to do it and work it out as we go?
Really more the latter, especially right now. I mean, we've only technically been in existence since the beginning of this year. The Bear record was the first thing we released back in March, and then we'll do 2 more here in the coming months. But we really are making it up as we go. Yeah, I can't say there's any formal plan yet. It's really more as we deal with more bands, and different bands have different needs. Bands say, hey, we need this. We can either say, well, we don't really want to do that, or we really can't do that, or we're not really set up to do that, but maybe we can figure out a way to do it. In a sense, I think that's an advantage, because the sort of traditional music business infrastructure and label infrastructure is falling apart a little bit, and has been for the past decade. And to an extent, I think us being small and new and not committed to all these different tasks as a traditional label is helpful to us, because I think we can find ways to do a lot of the same things, but have the fat trim, do it a lot leaner than is typically done by larger labels.
And there's been a lot of freelance stuff that's popped up rather than in-house.
I don't think every band we work with is going to be interested in something like radio promotion, so there's no need for us to have a ever probably, a radio promotion on staff. But if we do encounter an artist who either really wants that or it seems like that could really be advantageous, well, in that case, we can explore that, see what that looks like, and see if it's something that we want to do. Or even if it's not something we want to do, since the band is going to hopefully be actually making some money from their record, with even modest sales, they'll be making some money. That's really, we're more about putting the artist in a position of empowerment and autonomy. With a little bit of our help, they can, and like I said, not with still modest sales, they can be making some money, and they don't need our permission. If they want to do radio, they can do it, and if they want our help, we might be able to help them, but it's more about keeping those bands autonomous, letting them decide their own destiny a lot more than they typically would be able to if they had a more sort of traditional record deal.
Sure, but the information alone is huge.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, between me and John, if somebody does want something like radio promotion, for example, we can at least call some people. We're discovering that what's lucky for us right now is because we've been part of some successful stuff in the past couple of years that people will at least take our calls. They'll at least pay us a little bit of attention.
I mean, you kind of got a lot going on.
Yeah, a little bit. There's been talk, like right now, I'm for the first time in a couple of years, I'm sort of at the end of a bunch of records. Like we finished the Bear record, the Belle Adair record, and the St. Paul record, and I'm sort of sitting where I don't have any recording plans set right now, which is strange for me. But, I mean, the Pollies are talking about starting work on their next record later in the year. We're still sort of working on when we'll start that, but Jay's already written a ton of new songs, and they're great. Hopefully I expect that we will start working on another record this year, hopefully have something done either by the end of this year or early next year.
So in terms of the logistics of recording, do you have something available, like a space available to you now at this point?
Yeah, it's a bit of a wreck right now. John Paul and I have a house that's like an old rental house kind of thing that we've been sort of gradually transforming into a recording space. It's getting there. I mean, I've used it for some stuff already, but it's still very much a work in progress. And we're both really busy, so we sort of work on it when we can. Fortunately, I have really good relationships with a couple of studios in town, especially at the Nut House over in Sheffield, like Jimmy Nutt, who owns that studio. He and I have worked together a whole lot, and we're friends, and he rents me the studio for a really good rate, and also knows that he can rent it to me and just leave. He trusts me and knows I know the space and all that. So, like, that's where we cut the St. Paul record. That's where we cut most of the Belle Adair record. And because of my relationship with Jimmy, I can use a really, really great studio and not have to break the bank to do it. It's awesome. And the same with, like, mixing the St. Paul record at Fame. I mean, they also get, like, they really like the band, and we found a time when they didn't really have anything else going on anyway, and so they gave me a really friendly rate on mixing it there. So until we get our studio sort of completely up and running, it's still been really affordable, and that's something that we have to offer. We can go work some places for pretty cheap, and I mean I want to do more of that because I've other friends around the South, like we've talked a little bit with the Dial Back studio people over in Water Valley, or like Dave Barbie's studio in Athens. We've always talked about exploring the Southeast studios a little more. Even
just a different place brings a different vibe.
Absolutely.
There's also, different advantages to living on site versus not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the past few years on the studio side, I've done a whole lot of mobile recording because I started doing some audio for videos, like that Live from the Shoals video series. Have you seen that stuff? That was me and Corey Hanna.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that just started as a sort of fun project to get some bands some decent video. But by doing that, I realized I could have a bare bones sort of stripped down studio and fit it all in my car. So I did a lot of stuff, location stuff, like Doc's second album. We recorded a bunch of it in the back of the Billy Reed store in Florence. And we did the Bear record, almost all of it at their house. So I have good relationships with studios, and we're working on a studio of our own, but I've also become real accustomed to recording in not traditional studio spaces. Has its advantages and disadvantages. It's sometimes infuriating and frustrating. You also get some stuff you wouldn't get otherwise.
Exactly. Single lock as in not like a lock in a door, but like a lock like water, or?
It's a dam. Yeah, a lock is in a dam. Okay. The Wilson Dam on the Tennessee River in Florence, which is built by the TVA in the 30s probably. When it was built, it's a single lock dam, which is just a sort of feature of the design of the dam. When it was built, it was the largest single lock dam in the world.
Wow.
It's not anymore, but it's still one of them. But when we started talking about names, which is just the hardest thing in the world, whether you're naming a band or anything, we threw around a lot of ideas, and at some point that one came up, and it's really just the one we hated the least at the time. And we're like, oh, but then it kind of grew on us because there's something about the idea of like the Wilson Dam being the largest of the smallest kind that we thought was kind of funny and appropriate. And totally unintentionally, the whole lock and single lock thing became a sort of metaphor for what we want to do, in that we can get you from, like the lock gets you from the river to the lake, if you're in a boat. It's like if you need to get from the river to the lake, we can get you there. Once you're on the lake, we can kind of help direct you, but you're really steering the ship. And also that idea about sort of each project sort of feeding the next project makes it where we're really trying to kind of focus on one project at a time and not try to do too many things at once. And that a single lock sort of can only has so much capacity. We'd rather do each thing well than overextend ourselves trying to move too much through the lock at once.
Ben, I really appreciate your time talking with me about this. When I first heard about the record label and then who was involved from the band standpoint, I was like, this is going to be really neat for a lot of people.
Yeah, we hope so. I mean, we're figuring it out as we go, but we're excited about it.
Very cool. Well, best wishes to Single Lock Records and, of course, all the bands, and safe travels to you on the road.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care. Thanks a ton. Bye-bye. Country Fried Rock, music uncovered. Find our full playlist at countryfriedrock.org. You can subscribe to our weekly podcast on iTunes. Just search Country Fried Rock. Our theme music is from The Heap. Check them out at heapdeluxe.com. That's HEAPDELUXE. Our Country Fried Rock stinger is from Steve Soto and the Twisted Hearts. Country Fried Rock. Copyright 2013 by Lilypad Productions. All rights reserved. Country Fried Rock is a partnership with the nonprofit Florence Regional Arts Alliance. Your donations to this program are tax deductible to the extent you are eligible under U.S. law. Country Fried Rock radio programs are distributed to public radio through the Public Radio Exchange, prx.org.
Ever he been helping us some country fried rock.